I was born in 1949, and I always believed in the God of the Bible. But I did not give God, the Bible, nature, science, or history much serious thought until the mid-1970s. As an American, it was culturally easy to believe in God until the mid-1960s. As many did, we went to church every Sunday morning, and the Bible and prayer were included in public schools, in class, Thanksgiving and Christmas programs, and graduation ceremonies. Before major college football games, there was a Christian prayer called an invocation. My father grew up in a denomination that was drifting towards religious liberalism, which meant they kept the outward appearance of being a Christian church, but they were buying into the Enlightenment's diminishing of the supernatural in favor of evolution stories for nature and history. As his science education at Iowa State and Purdue universities was saturated with evolutionary naturalism, he became a theistic evolutionist, which means God used evolutionary processes to create everything. Looking back on it, he had become a semi-deist. God created and then has not intervened, at least very often. By the time I finished high school, my dad was the biology department head at the local state college in Michigan, where I followed his lead and took classes in general biology, general zoology, physical anthropology, geology, and physics. I assumed the evolutionary progress stories were true because my dad believed them and he was smart. They seemed to be the assumed paradigm in every field, and it was portrayed as what all scientists and educated people believe, confirmed by overwhelming evidence and the only possible rational and scientific explanation. And some big names in science were even asserting that Darwin and science had discredited belief in God.
Darwinism removed the whole idea of God as the creator of organisms from the sphere of rational discussion. Science makes God unnecessary. The laws of physics can explain the universe, without the need for a creator.
Since the terms and ideals of reason and science have long been highly respected in Western civilization, as they were in our home, it leaves you wondering what you should do about God. Admit your faith and be ridiculed by teachers and peers? Believe in God inwardly but keep quiet about it? Or stop believing in God? Looking back, I can say this. I really had not been convinced by evidence and logic that any of the evolutionary stories were true, and I was not ready to reject the supernatural. So where did that leave me? I was confused. In later discussions, I learned that my dad had been confused too. He believed in God's existence, but he had embraced the evolution stories as true and had been taught that science required keeping God out of the discussion. The textbook he used for general biology made this quite plain. The supernatural has no value in science, and those who believe in the supernatural must act as though God has not had any direct involvement with the universe since creation. Correct science requires that approach, and if you won't go along with that, then you're not a scientist. Well, he went along with that, and he was upset when students would question Darwinism because of the Bible. Little did he know that in a few years he would have one of those Darwin-doubting infidels in his own family. My problems with Darwinism started with small seeds planted by the textbook he used for general biology, when sweeping assertions were made without any convincing evidence. For the question of life's origin, the textbook simply asserted,
life too must be a result of physical and chemical events only. Science today can account for living properties in purely mechanistic terms.
That was it. No formula, nor did we do any lab experiments to mix up possible recipes and create single-cell life in a petri dish. That would have been exciting. If we had, I might have become a biologist. But the point was made. We don't need God anymore to explain life's origin. Just trust us on this one.
There is every reason to believe that living things owe their origin entirely to certain physical and chemical properties of the ancient earth. Nothing supernatural appeared to be involved.
And I was a bit turned off to the view that the universe and life are just a huge, complex cosmic accident, and that science offered no ultimate truth, value, purpose, meaning, or hope.
The basic philosophic attitude in science must be mechanistic and causalistic, and we note that the results obtained through science are inherently without truth, without value, and without purpose.
Most college students don't understand enough to do more than go with the flow of whatever their highly educated or indoctrinated professors are advocating in order to get a degree, and I was one of them. But I sensed that something was wrong with science. Assertions were made about the origin of life, but no details or lab experiments, and we heard there were lots of fossils proving Darwinism, but we never saw them. So I switched to social science and filed my questions away for later. So I drifted for a few years, until in 1974 the drummer in the weekend band I played in started a conversation about God, the Bible, and creation. After about 5 minutes, I realized he was aware of things I had never heard of, but these were things that were related to the discomfort I had filed away for reconsideration later. It appeared that the time to reopen that box had arrived. Well, I started with an open mind. If evolution stories are true, then okay, but I wanted to be convinced by evidence, not pressured into conformity by confident assertions and the bandwagon fallacy. Like, well, all scientists and educated people believe this. If there are problems with evolutionary stories, then I wanted to hear the evidence and logic for the criticisms. Does God exist? And is the Bible revealed information about nature that corresponds to observation and evidence? Well, my dad taught me enough good traditional science that I knew how to observe life, collect and analyze evidence, and evaluate conflicting arguments. My training had taught me that people, even the educated majority, can embrace and promote certain ideas for reasons other than evidence and logic. So the journey began. First, I took stock of the situation. The culture, after the early 1960s, was clearly heading in a secular direction, led by the universities and the U.S. Supreme Court, as it began to hand down rulings that removed biblical theism from reality in the public sector. As a social studies and history major, I knew that the country was not built on a secular atheistic base, for the Declaration of Independence declared that all men are created and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. It also refers to the laws of nature and nature's God, and Congress appeals to the supreme judge of the world and professes its firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. God, or the divine, is mentioned at least once in each of the 50 state constitutions, and nearly 200 times overall. So while not wanting any one version of Christianity to be favored by the government, the founders did not establish an officially secular atheistic country, where God is excluded from reality. When Thomas Jefferson mentioned the principle of separation in his letter to the Danbury Baptists in 1801, his understanding was that the Constitution intended to keep the government from interfering with the free exercise of religion. Court cases up to 1960 continued that viewpoint. However, things began to officially change between 1962 and 2005 as the U.S. Supreme Court issued rulings that opened the door to removing Christianity from America's public sector, beginning in the schools. And it was all based on atheist complaints and the Warren Court's reversal of the meaning of the Establishment Clause in the Constitution and the principle of separation of church and state. The Supreme Court had now established the precedent by which the government would support atheist complaints so that the Bible, its ideas, and even generic prayer could be excluded from the public sector. Well, several atheist groups realized that now, with lawsuits or just the threat of a lawsuit, they had a powerful tool for pursuing their agenda by which the Bible and Christian ideas would be removed from the public sector. As the 1962 through 2005 U.S. Supreme Court rulings unfolded, atheists became more aggressive, and both schools and city governments increasingly feared expensive lawsuits, so they began restricting even voluntary student prayers or any mention of biblical ideas, and removed publicly displayed pictures of Jesus or the Ten Commandments. Eventually, court decisions would protect evolutionary stories not only from alternatives, but even from valid criticism, making them the state-endorsed and protected viewpoint. That was not what the founders intended. In Engel versus Vitale, 1962, it was determined that states may not require morning prayer in public schools. In Abington versus Schempp, 1963, it was decided that states may not require prayer or Bible reading in public schools. In Stone versus Graham, 1980, the Ten Commandments may not be displayed in public schools because students might see it, read it, be influenced by it, and that would be state-encouraged religious ideas, so it was forbidden by the Establishment Clause. In McLean versus Arkansas, 1982, Arkansas public schools are not required to offer any alternatives when evolution is taught. In his testimony, philosopher of science Michael Ruse provided what became the standard principle: evolution is science, but creation is religion. This is a view he later rejected, but the damage was done. In Edwards versus Aguillard, 1987, Louisiana public schools are not required to present creation ideas when evolution is taught. The decision also asserted the rather baffling view that raising doubts about evolution and offering alternative explanations does not advance academic freedom. In Kitzmiller versus Dover Area School District in 2005, the school board wanted teachers to advise students that evolution was a theory with some valid weaknesses, that intelligent design was an alternative explanation, and that students should keep an open mind. So the ACLU got involved, and the court decided that evolution does not threaten belief in a creator, and intelligent design should not be presented as an alternative to evolution. Thus, teachers are not required to denigrate or disparage evolution, nor mention any alternative views. This kind of shift, from biblical theism being assumed to a situation in which it is marginalized or forbidden, and only a secular or atheistic view is allowed, is not to be questioned or its weaknesses made known, does not occur in a vacuum, but is the result of an intentional movement or program that has been working in this direction for some time. In the mid-1970s, almost finished with my first bachelor's degree, I started thinking. Yeah, a little late, but at least I got started. My dad and I both sensed that something had gone wrong with science and Western civilization, but we could not put our fingers on what it was. I had some reservations about the evolution stories I heard in biology and physical anthropology classes, because there were major assertions in these stories for which there did not seem to be much convincing evidence. My parents had a number of books about the knowledge and accomplishments of early civilizations that did not seem to fit the cultural evolution stories I was hearing, and in 1974, I started reading the Bible with Genesis, and some of what I was reading seemed to make sense of some of the things the evolution stories just left hanging. Well, we're going to need to think about some big questions concerning origins, the universe, the earth, and life. What does the Bible tell us about these things? What are the evolution stories saying about these things? And what evidence has accumulated so far to help us sort these things out? Modern Western science began with Christian theists between 1200 and 1700, seeking to understand how God's natural order functions. But now, God and the Bible are not welcome in these discussions outside of Christian circles. Were things discovered that made God and the Bible no longer credible? Or have things changed in Western civilization and science so that those in control have tried to eliminate God and the Bible from how people think about these things for non-scientific reasons? Well, when we are finished, you will hopefully have a better idea of what the Bible tells us about nature, how modern Western science began and was later corrupted, and how we can have a spiritually healthy worldview in which God and the Bible are taken seriously, and traditional science can contribute to a more detailed understanding of God's created natural order and how it operates.